This happened a few years ago when I was 19. My parents went to visit relatives for a few days, and I decided to stay home. The semester was over. I could just relax, play games, watch movies, and go to bed whenever I wanted. We live in a private house on the outskirts of town. Outside the window is a small garden and a few old trees that creak whenever the wind blows. During the day, it's actually cozy, but at night, it's a completely different story. That evening was cold. I made myself some tea, turned off all the lights except for a floor lamp by the couch, and wrapped myself in a blanket. Midnight came and went, and around 1 a.m. I was about to go to bed when I heard a faint metallic clink in the kitchen. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes a cup shifts slightly in the dish rack, but this sound was duller, as if someone had placed something heavy on the table. I stepped into the hallway, listening. Silence. Only the old wall clock was ticking away the seconds. I peeked into the kitchen. Nothing. Everything was in its place. I even felt a little embarrassed for being startled over something so small. But as I turned back toward the living room, I noticed the pantry door was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it earlier that day. There are no windows in there, and it's always dark. I don't like it when the door is left open. I walked up slowly and peeked inside. Complete darkness. I pulled the door to close it and felt a faint, cold draft, as if air was coming from outside. That surprised me because the pantry doesn't have any ventilation. I shut the door and went to bed, telling myself not to overthink it. I woke up to the sound of faint creaking. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, only the glow of the streetlight outside seeping through the curtains. At first, I thought it was just the wooden floor adjusting to the temperature. But the sound came again, and this time it was longer, slower, like footsteps. My heartbeat quickened. I held my breath, trying to listen. Then, another sound, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping on the wall. Once, twice, 3 times, then silence, and again. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 3 a.m., the very hour all those horror stories talk about. I decided to turn on the light, and at that very moment, the tapping stopped. I sat in bed, knowing I wouldn't be able to sleep until I checked what was going on. I stepped into the hallway, trying not to make a sound. There was this heavy feeling that someone was inside the house. I quietly passed the living room and stopped near the pantry. The door was open again. A shiver ran down my spine. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door wider to see inside. Darkness. But in the back, where there should have been a solid wall, I noticed a faint, narrow gap. It glowed slightly with a bluish tint, like from an old fluorescent light. I had never seen it before. I moved closer, crouched down, and peered into the gap. It seemed like there was another space behind the wall, and in that darkness, something was slowly moving. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or a shadow, but the movement was too smooth, too much like someone shifting their weight from one foot to the other. I jerked back instantly, and at that very moment, from the gap, came a soft but distinct whisper. The words were unclear, but the tone, it was almost gentle, like someone trying to coax a child to come closer. My hands went cold. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and came back, but the pantry door was shut. I didn't sleep until morning. When daylight came, I opened the pantry to make sure I hadn't imagined it. And the wall was just a wall, no gap. I almost convinced myself it was just a strange dream, until I went out into the garden and saw bare footprints in the snow near the pantry window. They led from the house to the old tree and then disappeared. Since then, I've hated being home alone at night. A few years ago, I had to stay in my aunt's old house while she went abroad for medical treatment. It was a small wooden cabin standing on the edge of a village, surrounded by thick forest and the constant rustling of wind through the trees. I never really believed in supernatural stuff, but what happened to me there made me rethink everything. The first few days were ordinary. I kept busy with my tasks, tidied up, and went to gather firewood in the nearby forest. The house was old, creaky floors, and the cold air smelled of resin and dust. Evenings I spent by the fireplace, reading books and listening to the snow falling outside. But on the third night, something strange happened. In the evening, just as I was about to go to bed, I heard a soft rustling coming from the attic. It could have been anything, mice, the wind, but the sound wasn't normal. It repeated itself, and it felt like someone or something was moving up there. I decided not to ignore it. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the old wooden stairs. The attic was dark and cold, the smell of dust and old wood filling the air. I noticed a few dusty boxes and suitcases, and in the corner sat an old wooden doll with cracked paint on its face. It sat there as if waiting for someone to finally notice it. I took the key hanging around its neck and immediately felt it wasn't an ordinary object. The metal was cold and heavy, with strange rune-like engravings. It was strange that the doll was the only thing that made me uneasy in that forgotten attic. From that moment on, everything began to change. The next evening, I heard voices, at first faint, barely audible, like they were talking behind a wall. I went to the corridor, but no one was there. The sounds disappeared. When I sat in my room, I heard the doll softly sobbing. It was like a muffled child's cry. I almost couldn't believe my ears. Every night the feeling grew stronger. Cupboards opened and closed on their own, things moved around, and I started noticing shadows flickering outside the windows, even when no one was there. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling like someone was breathing right down my neck. I turned sharply. No one was there, but next to the bed, I saw a barely visible shadow figure retreating into the darkness. The next day, I dared to look through an old photo album I found in my aunt's desk drawer. There were pictures of the same doll, sometimes smiling, sometimes sad, and sometimes with a shadow reaching out its hand. I was even more horrified when I found a note on the back of the last photo. "Return the key, or it will return to you." That night, the doll spoke again. I heard a voice calling me to follow it to the attic. There, I saw the key around the doll's neck, glowing with a faint blue light, and in front of me opened an old wooden chest. I opened it and found letters written by my aunt, explaining that the doll wasn't just a toy, but a kind of charm that kept an evil entity trapped in the house. If the key was lost or used wrongly, the entity could be freed. I realized I had to be careful and never let anyone touch the doll. Since then, I never left it unattended and felt like it was alive. From time to time, I saw it slowly change position, as if watching me. Sometimes I thought I got used to it, but the scariest thing was hearing someone whisper the same plea in my ear. "Return the key." I never believed in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural. To me, the world was a place ruled by logic and reason. But everything changed last winter, when an old mirror in my room became the center of something I couldn't explain, something that still haunts me to this day. The mirror wasn't mine originally. It belonged to my aunt, who gifted it to me years ago. She said she bought it in some dusty antique shop during her travels abroad, but I never really cared much about its origin. It was big and heavy, with a dark wooden frame covered in intricate carvings that reminded me vaguely of ancient symbols. For years, it just hung there on my bedroom wall, silently reflecting everything that happened in the room. I lived alone at the time. My parents were often away for work, sometimes gone for weeks. Nights were long and quiet. I enjoyed the solitude, finding peace in the silence that stretched around me like a thick blanket. But it was also during those nights that the strange things began. It started subtly. One evening, while brushing my teeth before bed, I glanced into the mirror and noticed my reflection was flickering strangely. The image blurred, almost as if the glass was rippling like water. I blinked a few times, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my tired eyes playing games. But the flickering became more frequent. Then came the whispers. I first heard them late one night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. A soft voice, so faint it was almost impossible to distinguish, whispered my name. I sat up quickly, my heart racing, and looked around the room. Nothing, just the mirror, cold and still. I told myself it was just my imagination, the mind playing tricks in the quiet. The nights that followed were filled with more whispers. Sometimes my name, sometimes indistinct words I couldn't make out. They always seemed to come from the direction of the mirror. One night, after a particularly long day, I lay in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard the voice again. This time, it was clear and unmistakable. Come here." I froze. The room felt suddenly colder, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. The surface rippled like a disturbed pond, and then a shape appeared, a dark, blurry figure shrouded in mist. It stared at me without blinking. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The figure seemed to study me, silently, patiently. Eventually, I looked away and forced myself to calm down. I told myself it was a trick of my mind, a reflection distorted by fatigue. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Days passed, and the mirror's presence grew heavier. I began noticing small oddities. Objects shifting places, shadows flickering where there was no light source, cold spots appearing in the room. The air itself seemed charged with a strange energy. I became obsessed with the mirror. I spent hours staring into it, searching for answers. I traced the carvings on its frame, hoping to find some clue. But it was all just wood and glass. Then came the dreams. Each night, I dreamed of standing before the mirror, staring into the swirling mist inside it. The figure was always there, watching, waiting. It never spoke, but I felt its presence pressing against my soul. One night, the dreams became so vivid, I woke up gasping for air. The room was glowing with an eerie blue light. I realized it was coming from the mirror. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding. The air around me was freezing cold, despite the warm blanket wrapped around me. I raised my hand and touched the glass. The surface rippled violently, and the voice came again, clear and seductive. "Come closer." Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled forward, as if the mirror was a portal dragging me into another world. The room twisted and warped around me, colors bleeding and bending. Panic surged through me. I yanked my hand back just in time. A sharp crack split the silence. The mirror fractured, spiderweb cracks spidering across its surface. Since that night, the mirror has been silent. No more glowing, no more whispers. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and shadows deepen, I catch movement in the reflection that doesn't exist in the room. Shadows shifting, silhouettes passing by, gone the moment I turn. I don't know what the figure was or what it wanted. All I know is this: sometimes reflections aren't just reflections. Sometimes what watches you from the glass is waiting for the moment to step through.